Well, good morning. I'm Joelle, by the way, and this is Andrew. Just to correct you, Pete, I'm afraid, my ministry began in Sheffield Diocesan too. So I was baptised in Sheffield and believe that that's where my ministry began. So although I was born in Liverpool, my parents are both Yorkshiremen, and my father and my brother are big Sheffield Wednesday supporters. So... In fact, when we had our eldest son, my brother bought him the full baby grow and the whole caboodle, owls top to bottom. So anyway, my Sheffield credentials. Well, I didn't really know why Peter had invited us here, but I thought one of the reasons might have been around a paper that I co-authored with somebody who spoke at your last Diocesan Development Day, Alison Coulter, and Bishop Philip North, who's speaking this afternoon, which was setting God's people free. It was part of the renewal and reform agenda of the Church of England, and something that we'll talk a little bit about later. But actually, that whole piece of work that I was involved in started with me being invited to be part of the Young Vocations working group of the Church of England. And I thought, how marvellous to be part of talking about how young people can be serving Christ wherever they're called. What I didn't realise is that they actually were talking about young ordained vocations, and we were given a big target, which was to get the number of people under 30 up. Now that's a fantastic thing, and actually we did some stuff to increase the number of young vocations, which I think is great. But I believe that I have a vocation, I believe I have a calling, and I believe I am in full-time Christian ministry. And those three words are three words that I'm really keen that we all reclaim, whatever your ministry, your vocation, or your calling. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ours as we go through today, and I'll talk about mine later. But Andrew, why don't you talk about what the word vocation means to you?
Thank you, and it's really good to be here. Just so I can get a sense of the room, can you just put your hands up if you are a vicar or you have sort of reverend or venerable or bishop or something in front of your title, your name? Okay. Marvellous, thank you. I just wanted to kind of just sense check, that's what I thought. It is really, really good to be here, and thank you for inviting. And in these situations, when you're sharing with other people, in one sense, I always found that kind of God talks to me more than he talks to you. I hope he does talk to you, and I hope that some of what we say is helpful and useful. But since an early age, let me tell you a bit about my story. So since an early age, people told me that I would either become a vicar or a teacher. They thought teacher because as the eldest of 5 children, I was used to organising other people, and cruel people might use the word bossy. And they thought I might well be a vicar because, well, at school I swore less than other people. I sometimes talked about God, but mainly because my dad was a vicar. As for me, I had far higher aspirations of myself. I was going to be a teacher or a vicar. I dreamed of playing for England. I couldn't quite work out if I was going to do it in cricket or football, but it was going to be one of those, and if that all else failed, I would just be a very famous musician. So I did a degree at Durham, and where I met Joelle and Pete and Kathy and a whole range of other people. And then I pretty much fell into teaching. It seemed obvious to everybody apart from me. And I remember having told people throughout my life up until then, you will never, ever get me teaching. I will never do that. But I did, and I started teaching in 1985. And I had this view that I would carry on getting promoted until God sort of gave me the calling for a vicar. I was a bit like Gideon and the fleece. Yeah, this is not how I would suggest, and I'm married to a headhunter, this is not how you kind of do career planning. But I had this view that, I would, if an opportunity came, I'd totally go for it. And if I got it, God said, right, carry on in teaching. And if not, then I would go to the higher calling of becoming a vicar. And as opportunities arose, I went for them. And to mine and everyone else's surprise, I got them. Until after about 5 or 6 years, and I'm sorry that I am that slow, I'm still that slow, it sort of dawned on me that maybe this is what God wanted me to do. Maybe God was calling me to be in the world of education. He wanted me to serve him in education. This was going to be my mission field. This was my vocation. This was in the words of Mark Green, this is my front line. And since then, I've done a range of jobs in education. I did 17 years as a head teacher in 3 different schools, really quite tough areas. I did a stint as an assistant director of education, and I also kind of led the teaching school movement for about 2.5 years. And I'm now working for the government as a senior civil servant, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But Joelle's story has been very different, so I'm going to hand back to Joelle, who's going to share something of her story.
Great, thank you. Well, you're going to find out that when we tell our stories, it's a history of mistakes and lessons learnt. So we'll start with some of my mistakes. No, this wasn't one. We met in Freshers' Week at Durham University. That was one of the successes, but it was over a little bit of a mistake. At the time, being able to do the Rubik's Cube as fast as possible was quite the thing. And we were all sitting, and I can't remember, I'm sure Pete was there, we were all sitting in Freshers' Week in a room, and I was able to do the Rubik's Cube in under a minute. I can't even do it now, by the way. Andrew was sitting next to me and had got this Rubik's Cube, had his back to me, and he managed to do a side. And he got so excited about doing a side that he went like this, and my coffee went all over me. So that was how we met. So we met over a mistake, and we've carried on, each of us making mistakes. I started my career, Andrew started in teaching, I started with Lloyds Bank in the city, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the mistakes I made there, some of the lessons I learnt. But it was a really formative 10 years of my career, and helped to shape my approach to work. And one of the books I read at that time, Andrew's already mentioned Mark Green. We're huge fans of LICC and the work that they're doing. Mark had written a book way back called Thank God It's Monday, which I read at that stage. He's just, plug for it, I think there are copies over there, he's just released a new version of that, but it's still got all the same grit, and it's all about how we serve God in that Monday to Saturday space. Really recommend it. During my 10 years, I took 5 years maternity leave, which was a great thing that the bank was offering, where we had our 2 sons, John T. and Ben, who are now 28 and 25 and married and have jobs. Job done. No, we still carry on, being parents to them, and one of the greatest jobs that we do. I was also being a church warden at St. Stephen's, East Twickenham, which is where we were living, and I was vice chair of the primary school. Do you know what? Some people really took chances on me when I was a young person. Fancy putting a 20-some in charge of this, it was a sort of 500-strong church as the church warden, or even as a vice chair of governors. Look out for young people who you can develop and give them opportunities. It's been often the church that's given me those kind of leadership opportunities, which I've taken into the workplace. When Ben was just about to be born, we moved up to Cheshire, which is where I grew up, actually. Despite my marvellous Yorkshire credentials, most of my childhood was in Cheshire. And I was on maternity leave at the time, but was invited to go back to join a headhunting firm as the finance director. Not a great idea to put a banker in charge of a set of accounts, but they did, foolishly. Fortunately, I was only covering maternity leave, 2 days a week, couldn't do too much trouble. But when she came back from maternity leave, they were quick to get rid of me from that job, but did offer me to set up a banking practice for them, which I did. But I soon realised that wasn't the place for me. And the reason I realised it was because of some of the values that were being exhibited in that workplace. And I'm going to tell you a little story. It was about when I took my boss to visit my biggest client, who at the time were a business called AstraZeneca, a pharmaceutical company. Not terribly well known in the banking space, you'll probably be aware, but I'd slightly diversified. And he said that he wanted to meet them, and I'd got an invite for the two of us to Alderley Park, which is their big research centre, for lunch. Now, they were doing a lot of experimentation at the time, and so you had to go through a lot of security. And so I'd arranged that we'd get there at 1:45. 1 o'clock, whenever it was, we were due to meet. And we got there and we went through the first lot of security and we went through the second lot of security and we got to the reception desk where there was a great long line of people waiting to report in at the reception desk. And it was now 2 minutes to 1 and it was clear the line was going to take 5 minutes. So my colleague, my boss, went to the front of the line and shouted at the receptionist that she know who he was and how important it was that he should be seen now. And at that moment I decided I couldn't work in this business. Because one of my core values, which is taken from, well, Jesus said it on a number of occasions, which is treating others as you want to be treated. And that's no way to treat anyone, whether the receptionist at AstraZeneca or the chair of some great board. And so at that point, I decided, right, I'm going to leave here, and with the beautiful innocence of a 30-something, and I'm going to set up my own business. So I set up Warren Partners, and I said, and we're going to set it up on the basis of this one verse, which is treating others as you want to be treated. And I'll talk a little bit about how that plays out later. But I did make some big mistakes there too. And one of the mistakes I made was listening to the advice of people who want to sort of take you off course. So I had a marketing advisor who said, Joelle, you can't put yourself out there as an ethical business. And I sort of thought, well, why not? And she said, well, you're putting yourself up to be shot at. So when we first launched the business, we didn't say we are an ethical business. But actually, a mistake I've learned, a lesson I've learned is you can. And you can put yourself out there. And actually, the more you put yourself out there in the non-Christian world for Christian values, the more they are holding you accountable for them. So we now go out there proudly and say we're an ethical business. And I find that it's my non-Christian colleagues who will challenge me on, oh, is that treating others as we want to be treated? And, oh, is that, loving people as you would want them to be loved. And so non-Christians can hold us accountable for Christian values. Well, Warren Partners grew, and then came the recession, and Warren Partners dived. So it was 2008, the economy is tanking, and a third of our business is in financial services, and you will remember Northern Rock and the pictures of the people outside the branches. Well, we were working with all the building society movement. They really could tune in with our ethical values, and we had no financial services business, so we lost a third of our revenue overnight. All of a sudden, I'm having to work out how to make redundancies in a way that's treating others as you want to be treated, how to survive a recession that's treating others as you want to be treated. And I made another huge mistake, which is I took St. Augustine far too seriously. And one of the things he said was, pray as though everything depended on God. Well, I was doing that, I can assure you. But then he said, work as though everything depended on you. and I was doing that far too much. So I was working the most ridiculous hours. I was almost trying to prove to everybody and to myself that I could work us out of this recession. And actually, it was no good doing that. There was no time for creative thinking, no time for strategic thinking. I was finding it hard to delegate. And the crunch point came when it was having an impact on my health. So at that point, I established what I call my life board. So companies have boards of directors, so I decided I'd have one, but it would be the Joelle Warren Life Board. And I've got some amazing people on that life board. The chairman is here, so my wonderful husband. But I have members of my family. I have some great Christian leaders, Christian friends who will help me, who I can bounce ideas off when I get into that situation. I had to practice something in front of the mirror, which was saying no. No, because I was getting far too good at saying yes to everything, and it was almost a question of rehearsing. How will you say no to that? One of the tricks I've learnt is that I will not say yes straight away. I'll usually say, I need to check that in with Andrew, and that just buys me a time to pray, to think, and to talk to Andrew and say, is that something I should be doing? I realised that I was working ridiculous hours. I knew that had to stop. I remember one particular day when things were really bad. I realised we'd cut all the costs we could, and now I was going to have to cut jobs. And I was walking our dog at 6 o'clock in the morning round the field opposite, and there's a wonderful song by Lou Fellingham, which is based on 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 8. I'm hard pressed on every side, but I'm not crushed. I feel pulled to pieces, but inside I know I'm not. It feels like the world's caving in, and it did. I find it hard to breathe. The water's rising. Won't you come and rescue me? And God does come and rescue us when we call out to him. So I then had another conversation with various people, and we will talk later about where my ministry and my mission field is now. But I'm going to hand back to Andrew because he's changed jobs recently, so he's no longer, as he said, influencing 30 children in the classroom, but he's influencing 2 million children across 3,000 schools.
Yeah, so back in January, I became a regional schools commissioner. Actually, there are 8 of us, not 7, and unless something's happened, I don't know. I just need to check. And so we are essentially responsible for the school estate. And I report directly to the Secretary of State for that. So in my patch in the West Midlands, that means there are 3,000 schools and 9 dioceses, 16 local authorities, and a huge responsibility. And kind of, have I clicked on? Yes, sorry. You've got the clicker. Have you got the clicker? Okay, well, you have got it. That's fine. Keep it. That's great. We're a slick outfit, aren't we? We've got this down to a T. But in everything, whether I've been a head teacher, this kind of vision, every child in my care, whether in my class, in my school, in my kind of sub-region, across the West Midlands, 3,000 schools, I want to get a great deal. I want them to have a fantastic schooling. And if you like, that is my aim, that is my vision, that is my purpose. In fact, last night over supper, we were just chatting. Joe said, is that your vision or your purpose? And we're having a little chat through that. I think it's my vision and my purpose. But I'm responsible for a fairly chunky patch. But I think also what's happened is I've suddenly joined the civil service. I don't know, does anybody work in the civil service in the room? Okay. Excellent, a couple of them. Well, it was quite a shock to me, and to join as a senior civil service, it was a massive shock. Just the list, you're kind of thrown into this new world of acronyms, new ways of working. I think in the first 2 weeks alone, I wrote down over 100 acronyms that you cannot Google, but without which they make no sense whatsoever. what's going on. And I kind of went into this world where the intensity and the workload was staggering. I mean, I've worked hard. I've never kind of worried about that, but the intensity and the sort of full-onness, absolutely staggering. In my first month alone, a judicial review landed on my desk, and I was named as the defendant alongside the Secretary of State. I'm sure he was delighted that I was going to be just in front of him after all of the 3 weeks in the job. I also got caught up in that dispute, which you'd have seen on the news in Birmingham, between a primary school and a Muslim community over the whole LGBT issue, and kind of you would have seen every so often a government spokesman. Well, often that was me or my team responding to that, and that was just in my first month. And I leave the home just after 6 in the morning. I get home often around 8 o'clock. I'm involved in media spotlights far more than ever I want to be or imagine to be. And all those things have just sort of changed. The last 9 months, my life has changed in many, many ways. But, and the reason I share that is because absolutely the most important thing is that in some sort of strange way, I feel that God absolutely wants me doing this. Does it feel deep water? Yes. Do I feel that I've got imposter syndrome hanging on my shoulder at everything? Absolutely yes. And if you ever feel like that, join the club. It's a funny feeling, that kind of gremlin or whatever it is on your shoulder. But this is where God wants me to be. And I couldn't be prouder to work in government. I didn't think I'd be saying that. A year ago, I wouldn't have said that, by the way, because I wasn't doing it. And if somebody said, you'll be saying that in a year's time, I'd have said, ha, you're kidding me. But actually, I couldn't be prouder. Our motto as civil servants is fearlessly advise, loyally implement. And, whatever the sort of the deep waters or the bubbly hot springs in which I find myself sometimes, for me it kind of works because I know absolutely, I can't quite work out why, but God has said, I want you there. And at the moment, that's enough for me. So, Joe, what does calling look like for you now?
Thank you. Well, Warren Partners is still going strong. We're just, I now have 30 people. We turn over about £5 million, and so it's not a big business, but we're split across London, Cheshire, and then we have a teeny-weeny office thing in Edinburgh. So that is my main mission field. I have the most incredible opportunities, advising clients, being in boardrooms, and talking truth to power. Mark Green, who I've mentioned before, who is member of my life board, says that he feels that I can have the privilege of being able to reach the parts that other Christians can't reach. So that ability to be in with a chairman or chairperson of a FTSE board and actually challenge them on behaviours and talk to them about how they treat people, I think is a huge privilege. But actually, from those early days in maternity leave when I was managing different jobs I was doing then, I have carried on doing that. And those of you who have ever been brownies or guides will recognise this badge. So I was a very serious brownie. I was one of those brownies who didn't just have badges down this arm, which is where they were supposed to be. I had too many. They all had to come down this arm too. And I took extremely seriously the brownie promise. So you'll probably remember it. I promise that I will do my best to do my duty to God, to serve the Queen and help other people, and to keep the Brownie Guide law. They have changed it a bit since. Unfortunately, God has kind of been shuffled out. But that was the promise that I took incredibly seriously. And the brownie, sorry, it's there. It's here on mine. The brownie badge has got those 3 points into it, which is doing your duty to God, serving the Queen, and helping other people. And that's kind of been a bit of a structure to what my life has been, my career has been. So at the moment, I don't just have Warren Partners, I have these other 3 bits. So the doing my duty to God. So we are involved in the leadership team of our local church, which is a great privilege. I lead the worship, Andrew leads the band, and we enjoy doing that. I've also recently taken over as chair of the Crown Nominations Commission to appoint the next Archbishop of York. So that's going to be our Archbishop across the Northern Province, and a key role within the Church of England. It's not an area I had any experience of before, but it's a great privilege to be able to serve God using my skills in that way for the church. Serving the Queen, about how long ago? 8 years ago, I was appointed Vice Lord Lieutenant for Cheshire. So what a job. I had no idea what the Vice Lord Lieutenant was. I didn't know what a Lord Lieutenant was. I don't think I'd ever met a Lord Lieutenant. But basically, we are the Queen's representatives in Cheshire. And the great fun things you get to do are look after the royal family when they come on royal visits. And some of the other privileges are to be going out into the community, and I'm responsible for the Queen's Award for Voluntary Service and the honours system within Cheshire. And then there are some sad things that you have to do. So when there's a military funeral, I would be there representing Her Majesty at that. But that's another huge honour. And then the helping other people. And, Jesus does call us, doesn't he, to go out and to help the poor and the widows and the orphans. And 8 years ago, I set up a community foundation in Cheshire. So you have one here. You might be covering a number of different ones across Sheffield Diocese, but Cheshire didn't have a community foundation. And so it's been a great privilege for me to set up and then to chair the Cheshire Community Foundation. And so I'm ministering in all of those places. Andrew, when people look at your career, they often go, wow, that's really impressive. But what have been some of the challenges living out that calling?
Actually, sweetie.
It's me.
That's what I should have been asking you.
Okay. Well, how about I ask myself? But I don't think it sounds very impressive at all. We switched things around, apologies. So I'll tell you the first challenge that I was going to tell you, and that's about being faithful in small things. So, this all started with a story in Lloyd's Bank, and at that stage I was running one of the kids groups, and on a Sunday morning I needed some paper clips for the activity that I was going to be doing. And I was very busy in the bank. I was managing a large branch, and I didn't have time to go out and buy some paper clips, but I knew we had them in the stationery cupboard in the office. And so I said to one of my colleagues, I'd like to buy a box of paper clips from Lloyd's Bank, from the stationery cupboard in the office. And they said, oh, don't worry about that. We've got loads of paper clips. Just take a box. And I said, no, I can't, because I'm a Christian. I've got to pay for these paper clips. And that was, if you like, the start of what I'm talking about here, about being faithful in small things. Because you'll remember in Luke 6:16, Jesus says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. I'll give you another example from a Warren Partners situation where we'd just hired a new partner, and he was joining us from the competition, and he was due to start in a month's time, but we had a team strategy session in the interim, and we'd invite him along to that, and he came along, and then the next day he rang me and he said, I'm not going to join. Well, that's pretty embarrassing, having just experienced us for a day, to say I'm not going to join. So I said, why? And he said, because you, Joelle, are commercially naive. So I said, okay, in what respect am I commercially naive? So he cited me 2 examples. The first one was that when we go down to London to interview for, say you might be interviewed for 2 different clients and doing 5 interviews, what we would do would be we would recharge the client our train fare. And if we were doing 2 interviews for one client and 3 interviews for the other, then we would charge, and this is the maths, 40% to one client and 60% to the other. And he said, how commercially naive is that? You could charge the whole train fare to each client and make, then you make money on your train fares. So I said, okay, are there any other examples of my commercial naivety? And he said, well, yes, there is actually. It's to do with advertising in the Daily Telegraph. So I went, okay. And at the time, we were putting all our adverts in the Sunday Times. And the Daily Telegraph really wanted to carry our adverts. So they said that they would give us a good rate. Instead of £10,000 to put a job advert in the Sunday Times, the Daily Telegraph would charge us £1,000. But we knew our readers were reading the Sunday Times for their jobs, not the Daily Telegraph. So we would charge our clients £1,000 if they put it in the Daily Telegraph and £10,000 here. And he said, you could charge them £10,000 for that and you'd make £9,000 on it. And I said, but that wouldn't work because the candidates aren't reading the Telegraph yet. We've got to build that market. And he said, good example of commercial naivety. So anyway, I now do quite a lot of speaking to groups, non-Christian groups, probably more than Christian groups, and I call it proud to be commercially naive, because that's what being faithful in small things is all about. Is it me now? Hang on, I'll tell you what, no, it is, because I know I talk about this next one. So this one is being clear about our true north. So there's lots of guidance that's given to women particularly about how to find your inner compass. And we're taught how to play the men's game and how to network and how to be more assertive and how to dress for success. Well, I haven't got daughters, but I've got 2 fabulous daughter-in-laws, and I might have granddaughters. I've actually ordered them. But I will be teaching them to follow their inner compass, not to listen to what other people are trying to define us by. And one of the mistakes I've made over the years is listening to people who say, you should do that, you should do the other. But my inner compass is Jesus' teaching. And my inner compass is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbour as yourself. And that's my true north. And so I've had to learn to forget the voices of other people who are telling me to be something and to listen to that inner voice in every sort of decision making that is around loving God and loving my neighbour. It's been my inner compass. Andrew, I am going to hand over to you now.
So Joe's talked about being faithful in small things and the inner compass. I just want to say something about vulnerability. Oh, sorry. Is it that one there? Yeah, that'll do it. So one of the things I've had to learn is about the willingness with which I share my vulnerability. People can often say, she's not as tough as you think. Well, he's not as tough as people think. And we don't like sharing, do we, what we can't do. We're quite comfortable sharing what we can do. And as I've got older, I have learned that it is okay to be vulnerable. In fact, it's actually a good thing because it pulls people in, it helps people. But I don't think that I found this an easy lesson to learn. I've been a head teacher in some really challenging places, alongside some really ruthless local people, gang leaders and all that. And standing up to them has been really, really important. I think in my time, I've been threatened with violence, legal action, union action. A group of parents once tried to get rid of me, and they held a march to get rid of me because I banned sweets and fizzy drinks from the school premises. And I've literally had a number of times it's been really, really challenging, and it's important to stay positive and strong. The trouble is that you can get to thinking that I have to be Superman. I have to be this strong person, when clearly I know that I'm not. And so I've had to learn about understanding my own resilience. And I have this kind of thing in my head called my resilience levels. It's almost like a little check, where on a scale of 1 to 10, I kind of, check in where I'm at. What I've also learned is that I don't, so if 10 is strong, I'm as strong as ever I'm going to be, bring it on, I'll have it right now. And 1 is I feel really weak and feeble. What I've also had to learn is not to beat myself up because I'm a 2. Why on earth are you a 2? What I try to notice is, what does the job ahead require me to be? So if it requires me to be a sort of a 5 and a 6 or a 7, then if I find myself not in that place, it's just taking some sensible time to what would help me? What would help me to just kind of up it a bit? So for me, having people who encourage me, who love me, who, again, like Joe, groups of people, I can ring them, they'll talk to me, they're kind of up that. And I've also learnt about the way I talk to myself, the way in which I manage my inner script. I just want to share a little story. It is quite personal, but maybe it will help you understand a bit. So in 2006, I was working in Stoke-on-Trent. I'd been there 4 years. It was one of the worst schools in the country. A whole range of things had happened there. And then in March, it got an Ofsted judgment of good. And I remember telling the staff that, and the staff, half of them laughed and clapped, the other half cried, because in its history as a school, it had never been good. Been open 50 years, it had never been good. It was always a really difficult school. And people were sort of congratulating me and telling me what a wonderful leader I was, and the world is my oyster. From April onwards of that year, pretty well everything I did went wrong. I was the same person. I was doing the same things. Everything went wrong. We got our worst results ever. So we were the second bottom school in the whole of Stoke-on-Trent. And Stoke-on-Trent's quite low down the league tables anyway. We had an incredibly challenging and upsetting child protection case, which ripped us all apart. A member of supply staff killed herself in tragic situations. And then one of my staff, who had a 9-month-old baby, the baby died. There's a whole range of things, and for various reasons, I thought it was my fault. It might not have made any sense to say that to you now, but that's actually how I felt. And I remember being in New Year's Eve. We used to go out to France. We have a place in the Alps, and we were up in the mountains. And on New Year's Eve, we used to have a thing that, as a family and with friends, we'd ski down to a little restaurant high up. We'd have a meal high up, and then put head torches on and ski down, greeting the New Year. And I was up there, and the sun was setting over Mont Blanc, and I kind of shooed everybody off. I said, "Look, I'll meet you down there." And I sat alone on this mountaintop watching the sunset. And I remember, when to non-Christians I say, I heard a voice. I believe very strongly it was God speaking to me. And as I was on this mountaintop, I was kind of shouting, and it was kind of like an angry response to God. Why have you let this happen to me? And I was shouting how rubbish I was. I was using all sorts of obscene and horrible language, describing, I'm rubbish at this, I'm rubbish at this. Everything I touch breaks. Everything I get involved in, it just falls to pieces. And luckily there was no one else around, but I was kind of going for it. And I don't do this often, but it kind of just came out of me. And as I'm shouting out how terrible everything is, how rubbish I am, and tears are pouring down my cheeks, which are almost freezing on my cheek as I spoke, I heard this voice. I heard God speak to me, and he said to me, "Why are you speaking to yourself like that?" And then the voice said, "Have you ever spoken to anybody else like that?" And the answer was, "No, I've never, ever spoken to anybody like that." And then the voice said again, God said to me, "So why are you treating yourself worse than you treat other people?" And as I started thinking about it, I kind of realized what God was doing was saying to me that I needed to take control of the script in my head. And what I've been allowing is voices to come in and saying, "You're rubbish at that." I mean, sometimes they said, "You're brilliant at that," which is just as unhelpful. But I kind of got this narrative going on in my head where I was saying, I believed what the voice was saying. And God spoke to me very strongly then, and actually made me promise that I will not speak to myself worse than I speak to other people. So I might say, Andrew, that was a stupid thing you did. That was thoughtless. That was selfish. What I won't say is, you are thoughtless. You are stupid. You are idiotic. You can't do anything. And I've had to work hard to manage that script. It's a constant challenge with me as I manage my inner script. I have this imposter syndrome which sits on my shoulder, and I just have to manage that. And maybe that's something which speaks to you as well, where I'd ask you, I do a lot of coaching. I wonder what the voice is in your head. I wonder whether it's one that God is pleased with. I've had to learn that. I'm just going to move us on, if that's okay, because I'm conscious of time. So, at the heart of what we've been saying, and actually there are a few other things which we would have also liked to share, we might do this in the workshop, is a deep desire for God's people to understand that our front line is probably where we spend most of our time. And though that might change at the moment, wherever you are at the moment, that is probably where God wants you, at least for today and for tomorrow. We've shared a bit about our challenge, our work, and a bit about our challenges, and actually there's plenty more. The CV is not our real life. Most of the lessons I've learnt anyway, I've learnt flat on my face because I've fallen over. I've made a real fool of myself doing things. But as we just sort of finish and draw things to a close, I just kind of want to remind you about the salt and light from the Sermon on the Mount, because that's what I feel all of us are called to do. And I just want you to have a look at this short video. It's about a minute long. And it's of tea leaves being dropped into a cup of hot water. And I want you to watch what the tea does. And I want you to think through what God might be saying to you about the influence, the flavour that you bring wherever you spend most of your time, whether it's home or school or office or church or factory or course. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you have a sense that God has put you there. And as you watch these tea leaves, just be maybe saying to God, what are you saying to me about why you want me to be? You see, we're called to be salt and light. And that video was a challenge to me, and maybe to you, about the kind of flavour that you bring wherever you spend your week. How your witness, how your love for Jesus kind of permeates through wherever you are. This last slide challenges us about the light that we bring. Do you remember that little song as children? I was taught it as a child anyway. Jesus bids us shine with a pure, clear light, like a little candle burning in the night. In this world of darkness, Jesus bids us shine, you in your small corner and me in mine. I have to say, I don't like that last line. You in your small corner and me in mine. I kind of think we have to be bolder than that. And I'm not decrying. Sometimes we have a small light and it's in a dark place, and we've got to be faithful. And if that's you, I completely want to encourage you. But I think God is calling us, and that kind of fits in with the diocesan mission, to be bigger and bolder than that. I think he's calling us. He's calling me, and I believe he'd be calling you too, to actually reclaim our workplaces for him. And for that to happen, God's people have got to stand up and actually kind of, realize we are that flavor. Without you there, those tea leaves are not going to be in the hot water. It is down to you. It is on me. It's on my watch that this happens. So as we finish, if you can stand, can I encourage you to stand? And I'm just going to do a prayer with you. I hope you're okay with that. I'm just going to ask Joelle to read some of the words from that great vision from Isaiah 6. And then I'm just going to leave a moment of quiet and then pray for you, if I can.
I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he'd taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me.
So as we stand, let's pray. Just maybe think of those tea leaves. Maybe think of the light. Think of where you'll be spending Monday. God doesn't wait till we're good till he calls us. God doesn't wait till we've got everything sorted. He chooses us broken, frail, wretched, unworthy, often thinking useless thoughts about ourselves. And he says, I'm not interested in your ability. I'm interested in your availability. And so I'm going to ask you the question, he says, who will go? Lord Jesus, I pray that you will bless us as we try to be salt and light in your workplace. Lord, forgive us when we're a terrible witness, when we mess up, when we're not true to your light, we're not true to your salt. Forgive us where we get caught up in ourselves and actually forget the bigger picture, the bigger calling. And Lord, please help us to be faithful to you, our Lord and Master. And Lord, as we hear your call saying, who shall I send? We want to say strongly and confidently, because our confidence is in you, here am I, send me. May the Lord bless us as we try to answer that call. Amen.